This tutorial discusses a range of different areas of study that have effect for political society and for politics, but can't really, as I write here, be easily charted in a graph or a visual. So if systems theory, and you'll have to look at that video, uh, does visualize the formal processes of decision making and input and output in a political system, then the larger environment, the society at large, if you will, in short, the political system is immersed in society, and the processes at work in that society uh, affects politics in many ways, and there are so many different forces that are at play. So I've put up a number of areas of study really for those who are interested in more the environment in that politics takes place in rather than the system as such. And I'll go over each one of these. And before I start, I just want to say that um, none of these are isolated from each other. They all intersect and they all interrelate in different ways. So if you're interested in civil society, you'll probably have to have a look at what some people have been writing about political culture, maybe gender theory, or what's happening with the economic system as well, because they all affect each other. But as scholars, we tend to pick one of these areas of study that we are most interested in and focus on that, and then take part of the other material that matters for our particular research interest. So let's start. I'm going to start here with civil society. So what I mean by this is all these interest groups and social movements that are engaged with politics might not be inside the political system as such, but they definitely want to influence the agenda, have an agenda setting function, and play a role on the political stage in some fashion. They all promote, of course, different points of view. You'll find business groups, unions, environmental groups, neighborhood groups, all sorts of different scopes, from the very, very large with very formalized charters and really large uh, conventions for the membership, to small volunteer-based groups in neighborhoods run out of someone's basement. And the relationship between these interest groups and decision makers will vary very much from country to country. The political system in each country will be one important variable, but not the only one. Uh, Part of studying interest groups and social movements is also studying political protest. And all entrenched democracies, of course, will experience some form of protest at some point. That's part of the democratic process. And they go beyond the activities of interest groups, some of these protest groups, but very few of them question the legitimacy of a regime. So they won't be striving to tear up the constitution or undermine the democratic order of society. And nowadays, of course, it's fairly common to see protest groups mobilized from identity-based social movements, environmentalism, feminism, the queer movement, and so on, which ties back into the development of new social movements. And I'll get back to that when I discuss shifts in political culture in the global north. So next up is political culture, and we can define this as a collective set of values, attitudes, and perspectives in a political community. And it really guides how actors in the political system, what they can say, how they can behave. And since this is, part of the definition of the word political culture is culture, um, so it's highly subjective, and it can be really difficult to clearly define and enumerate in a concise manner. But even if it can be difficult to define exactly what is Canadian political culture, what is British political culture, all the members of the community will have a sense of it. They might not agree to the main values of the culture, but they will have to relate to the political culture, and they will be aware of what is considered, shall we say, mainstream, and what is considered controversial, and what would be shocking within that political culture, and what would not be accepted. And what we can see here is also when we look at global north countries, a shift from materialist to post-materialist values in political culture in the late 1960s. And I'm going to get back to that just after clarifying the relationship between political culture and civic culture. So this term here, civic culture. Civic culture describes the acceptance of the democratic playbook, the acceptance of the democratic regime, and the legitimacy of the democratic regime in the political community. A strong civic culture gives democratic stability. And in essence, people might not like the outcomes of an election. They might be very, very grumpy about it, but they're not going to go out with pitchforks and guns and try to stop the democratic process. They will accept that they'll have to wait until the next election and then hopefully be able to win that time, and so on. So this acceptance, this toleration, this tolerating of an outcome that might not be in your best interest in one election, this is reflective of a strong civic culture. And what we have to remember here is to not be complacent about the civic culture. So if we look at what has happened in the global north in the past few decades, there has been a drop in legitimacy for democratic institutions. But even so, the legitimacy for them still remain. An important part to add here also is that civic culture is relational. It really describes the relationship between the governing institutions and citizens. And also we have to remember that the civic culture is not the same as a political culture. A community will always have some form of political culture, but it will not always have a civic culture. So if there is a totalitarian regime, maybe there is a political culture of fear. If the regime collapses, we can't be sure that a civic culture will develop right away to pave, to make a transition to democracy smooth. And that's why people are observing what happens in the Arab Spring countries. We can't be sure that there is a civic culture because, of course, in countries that have long lived under authoritarianism, a civic culture will have had difficulties developing, and that's one of the reasons why it's difficult to say if democratic transition to democracy will be successful or not, is because there might not be a civic culture established yet. These take time to establish, and when we look at the case of Germany, in, for instance, the development of civic culture after the war, the World War II, was one of these major concerns that political scientists had. Now, looking at global north political culture, one of the common denominators here is the shift from materialism to post-materialism. What is meant by that? Well, materialist politics is basically defined as class-based politics, and it was the primary driver of politics pre-1968. So what you find is conservatives, upper class party, liberals, middle class party, socialists, working class party. Very, very simple class structure to that, and that's something that you could see in most entrenched democracies in Europe and so on. Of course, the U.S. being a bit peculiar in comparison to other democratic countries in that sense, but generally speaking, that was the pattern. But in 1968, something happened. And now, of course, we can see green parties and other such not strictly class-based topics rising in the political debate. And many scholars have been curious about why that was, why this 1968, why was that a watershed moment? Engelhardt explains this by saying that, by turning to the Maslow hierarchy of needs. So effectively, this is the Maslow hierarchy of needs. At the bottom, you'll have the basic needs that has to do with surviving and being safe. And above that you have, and these are the material needs of a person. And above that you have other values, self-expression values, and so on. And Engelhardt calls these other values post-materialist values, which is values you can care about when you have food on the table consistently and can be fairly sure that you're going to be staying in the house, it's not going to get bombed and so on. And his point here is that 1968 was the first time that in entrenched democracies in the global north, that you saw a generation that actually grew up in relative safety. There was no immediate threat of war. There was no immediate threat of food rationing, food shortages. Um, Higher education levels than any previous generation, and so on and so forth. And this explains the shift in politics in entrenched democracies. And so finally, there was a possibility to care about something other than basic class issues. So post-materialist politics then is roughly defined as identity-based, organized on maybe lifestyle issues rather than a stricter definition of class. And that's where we see the rise of new social movements like feminism, environmentalism, HBTQ, the HBTQ movement, and so on. And this is also something that's a common denominator for all global north countries and all entrenched democracies effectively, is that you will have green parties or other actors talking about these kinds of topics in all of these countries. Another area of study concerns social structures, and what I mean by this is really identity politics and how identity matters. I've written here the heading Identity Matters, or Materialism versus Post-Materialism, or Class versus Gender versus Ethnicity versus Nation versus Race versus Sexuality versus Generation versus etc. etc. So the point here is that different social groups, each society, democratic or not, has a whole series of different demographics that makes up the basis for the community. Um, and different social groups will hold different social values, and that depends on class or gender or ethnicity or race or generation. So depending on what type of different identity demographics you're using, you'll find different value patterns. And these can also be grounds for differences in opportunities in society. Historically, some minorities might have been marginalized, might have been disenfranchised, maybe there was a dominant religion that was accepted by the state, and so on and so forth. And you will also find that political parties have mobilized people from different social groups. So I mentioned when discussing materialist politics how different political parties would align with different classes, but that goes also for all these other identities. So conservative parties could have traditionally appealed more to white upper class males, whereas socialist parties have tried to mobilize the working class, and green parties generally tend to appeal more to younger upper middle class voters with post-materialist value systems. Also, together with this, many of these previously disadvantaged groups have finally claimed recognition in public debate, and for good reason. If you previously were silenced by different oppressive structures, and we talk about democracy being about equal rights, well, then these previously disadvantaged groups will most likely take that seriously and claim their civil rights as well. So all of this explains the rise of identity politics and how it has affected the political system, how it has affected political parties. And they will have had to relate to the rise of these types of politics, and they've had different parties in different countries have had differing success in navigating this changing landscape of identity and reaching out to what these parties perceive as new voter groups, though sometimes they're actually voter groups that have been there all the time, maybe they were just ignored because they were part of these previously disadvantaged groups. Finally, another area for study has to do with political economy. It's the economy, stupid, really. How the economic system affects politics. And it involves all these questions. What is the economic base of the community? How to maintain and develop prosperity through economic policy? How does the economy affect political opportunity structures for the different social groups? How does it create incentive structures for political actors, institutions, citizens, or disincentivize people from doing certain things? Do people act according to the incentive structures or against the incentive structures? What are the concerns about social mobility or the distribution of wealth or economic equality in society? What are the effects of economic industrialization and globalization? All these matters are things that a political economist will think about and effectively say that politics is very much driven by the economy and economic systems and so on. So this then was a brief overview of the different areas of study. Again, they're not separate or distinct from each other. They often overlap, interrelate, affect each other. Pick the one that you might feel most interesting and pursue that, and then you will find which of the others that will be applicable to your interest depending on where your research questions might take you. I hope you found that helpful.